And we're a hot little farm here. Good morning. It is Thursday, January 16th, and you are in Summit Economic Development, Housing and General Affairs. And I'm Allison Clarkson, and we have David Weeks and Tom Chittenden here, and we are going to begin the day before we go to the Department of Labor. We're going to begin discussing rather informally some of our priorities for this session, and we began that conversation on Tuesday. And we're going to continue it by hearing from Senator Weeks and Senator Chittenden and not just their priorities for the work in this committee, but the bills they may be introducing that would come to this committee.
Sure, I'll say a few things. So the real priority is getting our property taxes under control, and that does intersect this committee in many ways. So on my afternoon committee, Senate Finance, we will be looking at the education financing formula and also changes the governance of schools, of course. But we also, I think, need to include in this conversation how the formula can be to drive or incent growth. I worry that Act 60, and this is something that a mentor of mine, Jim Condos, he was a South Burlington City Councilor, as was I, and he was a state senator, as I currently am. And he saw the evolutions of Act 60, and one of his big concerns when it was put into place is that it would take away the motivations from local communities to grow their grand list when they wanted to build a new school, build a new high school. So I think what we need to do is take that lens as well and looking at how we can spur economic growth through tax policy that incents and motivates communities to want to create more activity and not just see the downside of it, meaning the congestion, the additional demands on municipal infrastructure. So I think that is the economic growth lens. I'm going to have a lot of the big topics this session, not small by any means. I think in that you've already raised the appeals, so could I just echo those? I think we need to look at the appeals thresholds, because that's what I'm hearing from those that we want to build our houses. Why what we did the last two sessions are working so well is by avoiding the Act 250 process. It's not as much the money. The money is there, it's hiring the engineers and the lawyers and the fees, but it's just the uncertainty, which is what keeps a lot of new money, new investors, new builders from the process when they hear these horror stories about how one neighbor objects to something, it can stall things out. And that is an active and conscious approach to trying to stall or stop development that doesn't want to occur. People just run the clock down. And so I think we need to look at appeals in depth. The data privacy, that was an unfinished business from the last session. So I think that's going to fall into here. I am personally of the mind that we should stay consistent with our neighbors. And so I really like the idea of the Connecticut model when I'm hearing about it. I like the idea of consistency, giving consumers protections while also making it consistent for businesses so that they're not fending off unrealistic or baseless claims from lawyers around the country. So I have concerns about the private right of action. And that's where I would welcome more testimony, as this is a new committee to me, but I do like the idea of consistency with all of our neighbors. I got three more. Stormwater. So this is a topic that does affect homeowners. I do have a bill that I'm going to be introducing next week, which I'm floating around there. It has to do with the 3-acre rule. But I have multiple communities in my constituency that fell into this 10-year time period where the rules changed, and they are being asked to do things that they don't understand, that they can't afford, that they don't have, that common land does not exist to accomplish on impossible timelines. And so the rules that were passed by us over the past few years, not shedding any blame, I just don't think we're considerate enough for those developments that occurred during certain time periods where an HOA was not mandated, nor was it formed. And so we just have to make or align our 3-acre rules with the reality of how when you have 40 to 100 different homeowners being asked to do something in concert, you're actually effectively forcing them to create a municipal entity. And that's the process that doesn't quite exist or doesn't streamline. So I have been working with Ledge Council. It's a larger bill that I don't think will land here, but I certainly welcome ideas about how to make it easier for associated properties that were built at the same time to form functional HOAs in order to accomplish any stormwater management.
HOA, remind me the acronym.
Homeowners associations.
Oh, homeowners association, right.
So that, I mean, HOAs have other downsides to it, but it's also when you're going to ask a bunch of people to pay for something expensive for infrastructure that will be served for multiple decades, you need some sort of financing structure with accountability that are parcel assigned and not individual.
Right. And that would probably go to natural resources to start. But great. And Wendy is very keen on stormwater issue, though. Institutions may also be.
So she was in a few of the meetings on this, so she'll be familiar with some of the ideas in that bill. Two other things that I also think might land in natural resources, but it is economic development, is the advanced clean car mandates. So I think we need to recalibrate those. Those were put into effect some time ago through legislative rules. And I'm hearing from dealerships saying there's no way we can sell 35% of our stock as electric cars. It's just impossible. And so they're just going to end up selling less cars in total, which is going to force people to go and buy cars in our neighbors from New Hampshire, from New York, and so on. So I just think if we don't recalibrate those mandates before next year, we're just shooting ourselves in the foot. So I think we need to re-examine the feasibility of some of those mandates. Again, in the new subject area. And then the last one, which I don't think will land here, but it's probably judiciary, but it could be here. Stewardship trusts. So
Interesting.
Yeah. Patagonia is the poster child for this notion. But he was an owner of a company that wanted to incorporate and embed in the future operators, future owners, the ethos of what Patagonia made itself to be, with certain commitments, triple bottom line of sorts. And so there are states that allow for trusts in perpetuity. We do not. Our Constitution speaks against it, but other constitutions similarly speak against trust in perpetuity, but they have worked around that with unlimited stewardship trusts. So pick a century, 500 years, 400 years, 300 years. But a stewardship trust of sorts that would allow for the oversight and the commitment to certain values to continue on even after ownership changes, could give investors, customers greater confidence that when they patronize an entity, that entity will maintain the values that won their business when they started to use them. So that was my list. I like to talk really fast, so I'm sure there's other things that will come to mind, but those were the ones I took notes of.
Your students have to listen very.
Hopefully you give them a recorded
I do.
version so they can pause and start and pause.
Do your students have to be in person, or are they allowed to? How many times are they allowed to watch or participate remotely?
Since the pandemic, I do simulcast, so I always open up a team session and I record my sessions, but it is an in-person class. But students that aren't feeling well, they will stay home. But my quizzes, I love my quizzes. Those you have to be in person for. So
Well, courses keep people on top of something for it. Being married to an action. This is always useful. Thanks.
Yeah.
Those, I sadly think some of those won't be here, but data privacy probably will be, because it's a primarily consumer protected bill. And I'll discuss that when I get to some of my priorities. Thank you. I appreciate those are great. Those are all interesting and good things. David.
It's quite a list. And so I agree with 95% of what you're pursuing. I do, because this is economic development, I'm going to just focus on this topic. So for me, I came here because of economic development, not because of data rights, et cetera, et cetera. So in Rutland County, we have a flat economy, had a flat economy for 80 years. Okay. And there's reasons for that. So what my perspective is to focus on what caused, what the problem is, which then generates all kinds of symptoms. And I'm of the mind ready to separate symptoms from the problem. So I'm still trying to figure out what the fundamental problem is. I think I've got some good insights on that, given exposure over the years. But for me, that's really it, is addressing what the problems are, not addressing what the symptoms are. I agree with Senator Brock's comment yesterday or the day before about return on investment. I think that even, so that's how we're trained in industry, but in the government setting, I believe the concept's still the same. Not everything has a return on investment. Social programs may or may not, depending on how you spend it. But I do feel that what we invest in as a state, when we spend our treasury, it needs to have some results. And I'll give you one example. This came out of education last year. We dove into how the state markets our education institutions. And then that led to a conversation about, well, how do we market the state in general? I know we touched on it, I think yesterday, about how much we spend and where we spend it and why we spend it. But again, for a simple return on investment analysis, we can invest more to gain more as a state, whether it's tourism or quality of life or our academic institutions or our anyway, I'll leave it at that.
It's Heather Pelham will be in tomorrow, so we can begin that conversation because she always asks for more to market our state, and she can do very niche marketing. And so that will be a great conversation for us to have with Heather. She's the director, the commissioner of tourism.
Right. Housing's a priority. Obviously, you all heard that from our constituents. I'm a huge supporter of VHIP. I think VHIP is can provide a larger solution to the problem as opposed to what we spend, as Senator Ron Hinsdale mentioned yesterday, $600,000 per unit for new construction coming through some of our very well-meaning nonprofits. But I do think that VHIP has got to be fortified. In our county, my county alone, we've got 2,200 houses offline. And if we experience first to satisfy current demand, then to satisfy growth, housing demand, VHIP it's got to be a bigger part of that answer, given the economy of scale that VHIP can support the commercial market to get units back online. I'm a huge supporter of CTEs, and I know that's kind of cross blending between the education committee. That's
My passion too.
Labor force.
So workforce,
sustain.
yeah.
Workforce. And the last thing that I'm going to mention is labor immigration. And I know this is not necessarily a state topic, but it is our federal delegation can help us here. H-2B visas, H-2B, okay, not just seasonal workers, but invitational workers.
Yeah.
So I spent a career working overseas where I never anticipated or I just knew that part of the rule was I would go do my project and I would leave at the end of the project. So it's very elastic. I come and go. Everybody came and went. And I think the U.S. and Vermont in particular can benefit from H-2B visas, which do exactly that. You come in to work for the sponsor. The sponsor is the job provider, the housing provider, the care provider, and then they stay for the duration of the project. It could lead to citizenship, but does not necessarily need to lead to citizenship. And when the demand is over, they can look for another opportunity. But if there's no opportunity, then they retract back to their home country.
I'm glad to hear that, given that and tourism tie together completely, because most of our resorts and a lot of our lodging and resort businesses rely on H-2B visas. And unfortunately, the federal government has limited the number of H-2B visas we have been allocated nationally.
62,000.
Yes, it's really a huge problem. And they grew it only by 2,000 because it was originally they limited it at 60. Every state every state is apoplectic about that limit. And it's a huge challenge, and it's forced people to do workarounds. And I think you're absolutely right. Well, let's have under our workforce pod, let's make sure we have the federal delegation in to discuss exactly that, because that is a great partnership that we can be doing with our federal delegation.
I'd welcome opportunities to learn more about the VHIP program. I've heard it in passing, but I just don't understand how it mechanically works, where it needs more money or additional attention.
We're going to hear from Sean Gilpin, who runs it in the Department of Housing and Community Development. It has two parts. It's the low-hanging fruit we've really invested heavily in. It both renovates lighted, vacant, non-code compliant, unweatherized properties to be redeveloped for housing, renovated for housing. And it helps finance and provide grants. These are all grants, loans, that are, it also helps provide grants up to $50,000 for accessory dwelling units. So they're both opportunities to of grants up to $50,000 mostly, and the average grant is around 36,000. It's a matching grant. They have to, the developer has to, and the owner has to pony up. I can't remember the exact match, but it is, and for that, if they can take it as a grant or a loan, and depending, they take on the responsibility of housing people coming out of homelessness and or people who are low income and meet the HUD requirement. So it's been a fabulous program, and Rutland has been a poster child for VHIP in many ways, because you've done a lot of VHIP projects. I don't know how many ADUs, but I know you've done a lot of just straight renovation.
Correct.
And NeighborWorks has been one of our key partners on that. So our house, it's administered, the money is administered through our housing partners. NeighborWorks now, what's NeighborWorks now? Oh, they've merged, haven't they? But
They have, and I can't.
I can't remember the new name.
But
we have 5 housing partners around the state. So in our area, it's managed by a chap at Wyndham Housing Trust. And so those are the 2 aspects of VHIP that have been great. I also am a big fan of VHIP. So those are great. So my priorities are not very similar to yours. I, however, don't have a stormwater priority, but my priorities are, gosh, I have quite a few, but just generally under the housing bucket, one of the things we don't have adequate amount with I think the COVID really illuminated our need for investment in housing and all aspects of housing, from VHIP to new construction. And we need more dedicated money. So one of the things I will be having proposing is another dedicated source for money. And I apologize to our housing advocates that it's just not the hundreds of billions of dollars we need, but it's some, and our housing advocates say anything is great. So I think we need another dedicated funding source. The property transfer tax is just not generating enough for the volume of need that has been identified. In economic development, I really want us to focus on small business, and small business, really helping grow small businesses beyond their startup and really help grow them through access to capital and more really enabling them further, both legally and in any other resources that we have. But access to capital is something I want to explore more fully. Affordability we talk generally about affordability, and we acknowledge that we can control only a modest % of the costs that people are having to face in inflation. However, we can also address wage growth, and I'm very keen in working on some wage growth ideas that I have that I think we need to be working on. Workforce development. The first big piece that you'll be hearing about this morning, and I'll just tee up this morning a little bit, from we've been working for 2 years on this special oversight committee on workforce expansion and development, which Mike Marcotte chaired in-house commerce, Kendall Smith, who you're going to hear from this morning, and I worked on, 5 of us worked on for 2 years. And it grew out of a partnership with the governor's office and this committee to create one central place where all workforce was screened and funneled and then presented to the legislature with a financial ask and with priorities for each year. You're going to meet the new executive director of it. It's very exciting. We put it into place. We have a few, I'll have a bill that addresses a few statutory things that need to be finalized for that work. But we basically put most of it into play. And the idea is to have one coordinating workforce development czar, or in this case, Czarina, because they've hired people to be the executive director. But workforce is my baby. I'm really passionate about growing our workforce, getting people. One of the major reasons I'm such a supporter, not only as a mother, but as a child, is in supporting childcare, is the number of people who have been kept out of the workforce because they haven't had adequate childcare. And so I'm very excited to see that go into play and to see the difference it's making. But there are other workforce development things that are ongoing work that you and I need will work on, which is CTE, the reducing the barriers between career and technical education and regular high school, and that budgetary. We have some proposals, but we need to continue to work on that. Also driving career and technical education opportunities to be able to take advantage of kids earlier on, so that to go to your public assistance issue that you raised earlier. For me, one of our big challenges is the number of kids who are dropping out at 16. I want them jazzed and excited about something before they hit 16 so they don't drop out, because they become a huge drag. Human services can tell us that about that population, because that population pops up in a lot of tough places, and as they age. And I want to get all of us who had kids, want to have kids get excited about something, and I want to get them excited about something early enough so that they stay in school and develop that training and skill set. So I think there's a lot to do on CTE, and I'm very concerned that I've heard that in the Agency of Education's budget to cut to CTE, and that is something we should be addressing. That's a bipartisan concern. Labor, we're going to be needing to go through Proposal 3 again, the right to organize, which we did, which we'll spend an hour just reviewing that for our new welcome. So we'll be doing that. And I also, on the workforce piece, so that is a piece of workforce. The other is attracting additional people to the state. I'm still a big believer in continuing that work and bringing more taxpayers into the state and just more people anyway, we have our labor crowd arriving, and on consumer protection, our other big bucket. I'm getting our data privacy bill through. It's unclear where we're starting. We're starting a major piece of data privacy in the House, but we will also, there may be a piece that we marry with it, which is the kids code and the protection, the protections for children, which we may take as a starter here in the Senate, because it's a smaller piece, so we can marry that later on. But data privacy is a huge piece of consumer protection. I'm very keen on making sure we get through. Also, right to repair. I'm a big fan of right to repair. I may not have been born a Vermonter, but I am the daughter of an Englishman. And they very much embrace the same, use it up, wear it out, make it do or do without. And so I'm a big believer in being able to repair it. And that has been a real frustration, particularly as we move into our digital world. And you'll be meeting with the Apple person today who's here in the building. And we're all being asked to meet with him. And I just want to give you that heads up that I think that we ought to be able to repair the things that we own. If we lease them, it's different. But if we own them, we have a right to repair them. And I think that sort of covers a lot of my priority. The other priority is I'd like to really take our landlord-tenant work that we began last year, and that's a follow-up from our Act 181. And we'll be looking at that next week. But I'd love to move forward on improving our landlord-tenant work laws and our work. So that's a piece that will be coming into this committee also. And we have an update on that task force, which was not quite successful this summer, sadly. I was hoping they would come up with more recommendations, but I think we have some ideas floating around that will be helpful and move us forward and make everybody a little happier. So those are some of my priorities. So we're missing. We have 2 minutes before we're going to welcome labor. We could also just welcome labor a little earlier. Why don't we do that? Because we had some time at the end of our morning. And welcome labor. It's good to have you. And I don't know if you want to tee it up, if you want more chairs, pull them up. If you want to do things together.
Everybody's welcome to come up, but
Good job, her.
But no, everyone's right there.
Yeah.
Whatever you
look at
want.
Jay, who will also be joining shortly as well.
Right.
So just by way of introduction, for the
Welcome.
record, thank you. My name is Michael Harrington. I'm Commissioner for the Vermont Department of Labor. To my right is Kendall Smith, the new Deputy Commissioner at the department.
Yahoo!
We're extremely
welcome
grateful and excited to have her. And then directly behind me is Savina Hassel, who's the new Executive Director for the Office of Workforce Strategy and Development. And to my right is Rowan Hawthorne, who's the Principal Assistant and Legislative Liaison for the department. And then in a little bit, Jay Ramsey, Workforce Development Director, will be joining as well. So this is our traditional, like, get to know the department, but also I think you had some things you wanted to make sure we covered as well.
Absolutely. But at this point, I'd also like to
Yes.
welcome a new person to the team who's on our side of labor, Sophie Zadatny, who I don't know if all of you have met. Certainly Kendall and Mike.
Not directly, I think in passing, maybe.
So she's going to be handling labor for the Legislative
Yeah.
Council. We welcome back Rowan because Rowan, of course, began state
Yeah,
government.
that is correct.
Committee assistant. So we do a lot of training and prepping for the administration to poach.
Yeah, well, and just so,
Yeah,
I mean,
workforce development.
yeah, in all fairness, and then you took Cameron too, right? So Cameron Wood, who was our.
An interesting life cycle. Yeah, that's an interesting chart. That
Yeah.
one.
And he started here though, so he left, came to labor, and now he's back.
And the law school again, the law school as an economic
Yes,
engine for the state.
that's right. So welcome. This can be as much of a conversation as you want it to be. I'll give you kind of the high level of the department. You should all have a PowerPoint that's coming around the table right now. We're not going to go through it page by page.
Right.
Just a resource for you.
That's it.
It's the same PowerPoint that we gave to new legislators during our introductory
Oh, great.
meeting a couple of weeks ago. And again, it's just kind of a high wave top. So the Vermont Department of Labor exists to improve the lives of working Vermonters. We have 4 key divisions that you're probably for the most part familiar with. They are workforce development, put Jay on the spot, also unemployment insurance, workers' compensation, and safety. So that includes like VOSHA, Project WorkSafe, and passenger tramway, and then our labor market intellectual division, which you're probably familiar with, which is led by Matthew Barowitz, our chief economist.
We're having Matt come in.
Yes.
Next week or the week, yeah.
So the other pieces, and I'm just, since you do have the slides up in front of you, you're good. You'll see that one of the organizational chart there. On the top right are our boards and commissions that come out of the Department of Labor, Passenger Tramway Board, the new Apprenticeship Advisory Board, which replaced the Apprenticeship Council, the Employment Security Board, which is a higher level appeal for unemployment insurance appeal request, and that's both on the employer and the claimant side. And then one little known committee we have is the Labor Relations Board Review Committee. So we review candidates to be recommended to the governor, who then goes to the Labor Relations Board.
And then we confirm.
Yes.
Promise.
There's a new committee forming.
Yeah.
What is a passenger tramway board?
Perfect. I'm glad you asked. So one of the things that comes out of one of the things that comes out of the Department of Labor is our passenger tramway unit or team, and they inspect all of the chairlifts across Vermont and the new construction and modification of chairlifts.
Okay.
Somehow it ended up under our safety unit. And so the board does 2 things. One, it approves, it oversees the budget for the unit. It approves variances to the code. So there is a national code that we adhere to, along with some Vermont provisions as well. And then every year, the Passenger Tramway Board sets what they call the fee-due rate. And so that is the Passenger Tramway Division it's only 3 members. So it's 2 inspectors and a supervisor, a working supervisor. And the fee due covers the budget for the passenger tramway team. And so what we do every year is look at the number of modifications or new construction, which have a heavier weight into the fee structure. And then we look at the budget, which again does not change all that often, except if there's a new piece of equipment or increases in healthcare costs and payroll. But otherwise it stays relatively the same. And then the mountains pay not a percent, but a dollar amount, if you will, on each linear foot of line. Yeah.
So we don't have any more old fashioned cog trams.
No, but we
in
have,
Vermont.
we have conveyor systems as well. So it also covers the conveyor system.
Like escalators.
Kind of, but it's on the ski mountain. So like, obviously, if you are, on some of the smaller mountains, you simply stay on the conveyor.
Yes.
You plant yourself on the conveyor and it brings you up, or the rope tow that some of you may be familiar with on the beginner lifts. And then on the left-hand side of that screen, we have the newly constructed Office of Workforce Strategy and Development that also houses the state workforce.
Which we just briefly chatted about with the
Yep.
special oversight with
Yep.
Office. So we're gonna look forward to further discussion of that.
Not divisions, but you'll see we've got a legal team, we've got a business office team, and some other functions within the department. And I won't go through all of them, but the next page just gives you a little bit of understanding under what comes out of each of those divisions. So maybe what I'll do is just again work through what's on the PowerPoint, but kind of dig in a little bit deeper into what comes out of the different divisions or units. So you can go to the job center slide, which is
Black one.
yeah. And so right there, Keisha, on the top. And so we have 11 regional offices and 1 satellite office, but the 11 regional offices are listed there. We have one that's considered a fully certified federal one-stop job center, and that's our Burlington office. But they all are part of our job center system, and that system is primarily funded through the Federal Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. So you'll hear us talk a lot about WIOA, and that's probably a familiar term to some of you, but it covers a variety of different programs at the department, as well as adult ed and also voc rehab or higher ability, which do not fall under the department.
And how many of these job centers are staffed and open full time?
So they're all staffed and full time. The reason that there's a caveat there is because 1 of staffing, but 2 of demand. We are actually encouraging our staff, and part of what I think Jay is going to talk about is service delivery. So what we saw during the pandemic was a strong downturn in the number of people actually walking through the doors. So a lot of them are looking for virtual services. Obviously, we all know that Vermont's unemployment rate is at pretty much an all-time low. And so 1, there's fewer people who are unemployed, but those that are and looking for services are looking for virtual services, or we're having to go out of our physical locations and meet them where they are at. So you'll see and hear more about our staff being out on the streets or out in communities, or co-locating maybe at a library, which we're calling labor on location. We might go to a shopping center. We might partner with CCV and have office hours somewhere else. So all of those offices, our 11 locations, are open. They are open specific times for walk-ins. They're open all week long for appointments. Again, so that was another difference in the structure. You could do now by appointment, but also have certain walk-in hours as well. And again, this is where somebody would go to get either reemployment or employment services, job training support, learn about what federal support systems are out there for somebody who may be going through a difficult challenge in their time. There's also a heavy need right now for folks coming into our offices who are going through our UI system, and we can talk more about that because I think that's the challenges there on everybody's radar, and we can spend a little time digging into those. But we are seeing more and more of those folks coming into our resource center. Some of you may have remembered, years ago they were called the unemployment office, and that has not really left in terms of how people see those offices. So they see them as twofold: one, the unemployment office, but also these job centers where they can go and receive services for employees.
And Mike, I know this touches on Jay's area of workforce. Are these job center managers or directors, whatever your name is, are they also responsible for establishing relationships with businesses locally? So within their jurisdiction, are they also responsible for developing relationships with businesses so they can be directing people to those specific?
So most of those offices, with the exception of one or two, have 5 or more people. Obviously, Burlington probably has more like 12 or 15 people. At one time during the height of the big recession in the early 2000s, I obviously wasn't here, but the Burlington office had as many as 50 employees working out of it. So it's gone through different ebbs and flows. Our funding and the way we deliver services changes with the national economy and the state economy. So the more people that use our service or the more people who are unemployed, the more funding we get, which makes sense, but does make it challenging in these other years. And so, in Bennington, they have around 12 or 15 people. Rutland is another large office. St. Johnsbury is another large office. But you get to like Middlebury or White River Junction, and those offices have 2 people in them. And so it's a part-time. They don't spend one if they may be called to a different region to help support, but also if somebody is out, we also try not to have an office open with only one person working in there for safety reasons.
Maybe you started with this, but do you have the most updated number on our unemployment rate and our labor non-participation?
I have we can pull the number of the most recent, and Rowan, maybe you can just look that up real quick on our most recent press release. But we're right around 2.3%, I think, unemployment. If you hear from Matt, he'll tell you full employment in Vermont is around 4%. So we are well below what we consider full employment. And you'll hear him talk too that, we have about 2 jobs for every 1 unemployed person. The other distinction I want to make is that not every unemployed person is receiving unemployment benefits, right? So those are 2 different numbers. So when we talk about unemployed Vermonters and then people receiving or applying for unemployment insurance, those are 2 different sets of numbers. The labor force participation rate, so there's the participation rate. The interesting thing so 2.4% is the most recent as of last month, and then labor force participation is 65.5%. And so the interesting thing, again, some of you, this may be familiar to you, but labor force participation includes pretty much anybody. You can be too young to be in the labor force, counted in the labor force, but you can never be too old. So it really includes everybody that's about 16 and above. So you never age out, you do age into the labor force. And then it doesn't count what the BLS or Bureau of Labor Statistics calls institutionalized individuals. So full-time college, but also incarcerated individuals. There's a couple other categories in there, depending on somebody's abilities.
So can you break it out by prime working age? Can you do 25
you
to
can.
44? Do you know
Yeah.
the 25 to 44?
Not off the top of my head.
But we're having Matt in next week.
We
so
can
he'll-
share that.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah, so we'll just highlight for Matt when he comes in to break down the
Right.
labor force participation. It's obviously that age group. And you'll see a shift, part of Matt's conversation will be about the fact that you can literally see the baby boomer bubble shifting over the years through the different age categories. Obviously, our working age has the highest percentage of workers. The labor force participation rate is in the prime working age, 18 to 55. Obviously, it's less when you get to folks in higher age categories that have retired. Vermont, over the year, this is actually, I'll say a pretty, with the caveat, in recent years, this is a high labor force participation rate for Vermont. So it is, I think, back to pre-pandemic levels. But if you go back 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we've been into the 70s before. When you look across the country, 65.5 is actually pretty high compared to some other states. So,
No.
we don't have in Vermont, like when I talk to my counterparts in some other states, we don't have a lot of sideline workers, people who are just sitting and unable to find work. Those that, whenever you see our unemployed Vermonter number, that's not, that's a snapshot in time. It's also a statistical calculation, right? So we have people who may be unemployed for 2 or 4 weeks, but then go back to work, right? So they get captured in that number for 1 month, but not in another number. And that number is not actual people. Again, it's a statistical calculation. But the average, I think overall, the average amount of time somebody collects unemployment benefits typically hovers around 10 to 11 weeks, that from unemployment to when they are reemployed.
And then how does that compare to national?
I'd have to ask Matt.
Yeah,
I don't know.
that'll be interesting.
Yeah, I don't know the comparison nationally. Some it also changes because some states don't offer as many weeks as we do. Some offer the same. So again, that may skew the numbers, right? So some states after the pandemic had a lot of sideline workers. And so what they did was they actually shrunk the number of weeks of UI to encourage people to go back to work. So in some states, they were at 26 weeks of unemployment insurance, about half the year. And they shrunk that to 16 or 12 weeks to encourage people to go back to work. So again, we don't have a lot of sideline workers, and Matt can talk about this, but a lot of the challenge right now is that the people who are unemployed and unable to find work are also the hardest to employ for a variety of different barriers, right? So that also makes it very challenging. You want me to keep going?
Cognizant of our time.
Yes. So then next slide, I don't have to dig deep into it. It's just to highlight where our funding comes from, where in terms of federal funds, you'll see take up the majority. And then where is it spent? So our biggest cost areas are workers' comp and safety, unemployment insurance, and workforce development. Part of the reason the workers' comp one is high is it also included a large federal grant in there as well. And those are the next page is the 4 areas.
Sorry, just for our new members, one of the challenges that we face is the non-flexibility of the federal money.
Yeah.
And so with a department that's heavily constrained by federal money, they have very focused ways that they're allowed to spend that money. And so one of the reasons they appreciate state money and state support on programs is it provides more flexibility. Yeah.
Well, I have to ask, are you expecting any changes in the near term?
Yes, I think that's
Great question. I will say that for the most part, no. I mean, our national association has done some analysis of what to expect under the new administration. Nothing major, but even a little bit of money means big deal for Vermont, right? So the loss of $50,000 for us is a bigger hit than some other states, right? So
so we'll see how that sugars out.
yeah.
We always there's a Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act reauthorization, the commissioner mentioned earlier, that's currently working its way through Congress, correct? I don't believe they have brought that to final passage, but it tends to,
When do
So-
we expect that?
So it's up for reauthorization. It did almost, it was included in the last, CR continuing resolution. And then, and that's what killed the first round of, the continuing resolution. So it got pulled out of that and that's what,
Yeah.
passed in the second round. I think there's still an expectation, from, the Senate Health Committee, Health, Education, something and pension.
Labor.
Labor and pensions. Sorry, yeah, and like, it just, the pensions piece always throws me off. And it's a broad committee, but, they are still intent on passing that. We are obviously in favor of that, but I will also tell you that there are many federal programs that never get reauthorized, but still get funded, right? So not being reauthorized does not mean it won't receive funding. For instance, the precursor to WIOA was WIA, and that, the Workforce Innovation Act, that got approved, that got authorized once and then went on for like 30 years without being reauthorized, but still received funding. So again, one, it does not necessarily need the other. But we are expecting, a tightening, and I think every state is expecting a tightening.
Yeah.
The challenge for us is that we have seen either level or decreased fundings in all of our federal funding programs over the past couple of years, and we all know that costs continue to rise. So level funding is not really level funding for us; it's a decrease in funding.
That's how we do things here too.
Yeah, yeah.
Funny.
So, so let me just touch on each one of these. So that way, if you have questions, I'll leave workforce development to the end,
Okay,
because we've got Jay here who can maybe
Over
answer
here?
a lot of your questions. Yeah.
right.
So in workers' compensation and safety, the one thing to know about workers' compensation is that this is the group of individuals that mediate and make decisions around contested claims, right? So we don't administer workers' compensation insurance. We administer the program, which is when an employer, an insurer, and an injured worker can't come to agreement on coverage for a workplace injury. We will mediate that, and at times we'll also have hearings to make a determination on where the responsibility lies to cover that insured injured worker. That team also ensures that employers are carrying workers' compensation insurance. So we do investigations of claims of a lack of coverage, and there are some exemptions to workers' comp, but for the most part, if you're an employer that has employees, you're required to carry workers' compensation insurance. The other side of that coin is the safety side. It all goes to workplace safety, but the safety functions, the one you're most probably familiar with is OSHA, which is Vermont's Occupational Safety and Health Program. And they will go in and investigate injuries in the workplace. They will also go in and investigate complaints of unsafe business practices. But their focus is all about employee safety. So if there's a complaint about something that's unsafe or that impacts the public, that falls under a different function outside of the Department of Labor. But if it impacts worker safety, then that falls under our purview. The flip side of the VOCHA coin is that we have Project WorkSafe. And Project WorkSafe is a free consultative service to employers who can have us come in, do a safety consultation at no cost and no risk. So if they find any violations, the only duty or obligation the employer has is to correct those violations. But if they find a violation or an unsafe practice, it doesn't lead to an investigation. They don't get fined, but we will identify it for them. We will tell them how to remedy the situation, and then they just have a duty to remedy the situation. We talked about passenger tramway. And then labor market information, you're all going to hear from that. But that is essentially the labor data unit that we have. It has about 14 people that work in it. And again, they really administer a lot of the federal data programs, and they'll do some state work. You'll see Matt give many presentations, I'm sure. But for instance, when we look at the monthly jobs report that comes out of our office. Again, a lot of this is statistical information. So Matt gets his funding from the Federal Bureau of Labor Statistics in order to conduct the monthly jobs report. It's actually a survey that's conducted by the U.S. Census Bureau of homes, households in Vermont that, they'll pick whatever the sample size is. The Census Bureau will conduct the survey. The data they collect will then go to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, which then Matt's team will pull down, analyze, and deduce into our monthly report, and then him and his team publish that monthly report. So again, a lot of what comes out of his shop is federally driven, but again, it shows everything from the number of unemployed Vermonters, the number of employed Vermonters by industry, category, age. It'll show you employment by different sectors. And then also our labor force participation rate or our unemployment rate. And he can go through in more detail kind of what all of those different sections are and what data they produce. And you'll see that on there's a subsequent slide for labor market information. And then finally, unemployment insurance, which has been a heavy topic in this committee in the past. We are going through a $30 million modernization project that is slated to go live in the first half of 2026. But until that time, we are stuck with our legacy system, which continues to create challenges for us, both from outages for technical reasons or just a lack of functionality that seems to prevent Vermonters from being able to easily access the system. There are a couple different converging issues that we struggle with on a regular basis. For instance, right now we're in our busiest season due to seasonal layoffs, but we also have many technical issues. And then you kind of layer on the fact that when we went through the pandemic, there was a lot of automated functionality that was lost in order to get the system to function the way we wanted it to. And there is not a way to bring that automation back into the system for a variety of different reasons. So that has turned what was a somewhat manual, but also automated system into a heavily manual process system. So it takes more people to do the same amount of work. And it also is creating issues, everything from processing claims, answering calls, adjudicating claims, having appeal hearings related to claims. And then because of, I think, the heightened need and risk around cyber security, we've also had to layer on technology to further secure our system. But I think what we also know is that creates barriers for the people who traditionally use the system. And so that is also a challenge we're working through at this point as well.
But that's not new to the cost. You're still online in terms of cost and time.
Yeah, for the project, we're still on budget, on time. For our program, we are still looking at delivering the same services for the costs that we have in our proposed budget share.
We're counting the days.
Yes,
We're counting the days.
Maybe for the two new committee members, one was
Sure.
how old is the system?
So yeah, the original
legacy system.
The original mainframe went online in June of 1970. The code was updated in, I think, the late 80s. And so when we talk about the mainframe, the physical functioning of the mainframe, the servers and processing, that's the hardware has all been upgraded. It's through a third party, the offsite vendor at a secure location. But the code that's being used is still COBOL, and still, the interesting thing is,
It's almost as bad as saying it's basic.
Yes,
If you want
Yeah,
to
of course.
program for us.
We basically.
Sounds good.
yeah,
COBOL program.
yeah. So,
Help you out here.
yeah, terrific. We'll bring it. So, but I think, you know, this will probably ring true, right? Like part of the key to having a COBOL-based system is that you also have to have detailed notes on how it was designed, right? Otherwise, you're sifting through millions of lines of code to try to understand when I change something over here, what are the 12 other things that it has an impact downstream on? And so what we have noticed is that just over the life of the system, pre this administration and going back decades, we relied on the folks and the historical knowledge of the system without a lot of documentation around the system.
And they're beginning to disappear. not just
Well, so
retire,
we've
but-
had 100% turnover in our technical staff since before the pandemic.
Yeah.
Uh,
So this has been, as long as I have been in the legislature, this has been, at least we now have a time frame.
Yes.
We have a budget
Yeah.
and we are on schedule.
We've also gone through other UI modernization efforts in the past. The reason the one we're in right now is different is because for years, the federal government, the US Department of Labor funded consortium-based projects. So where we would partner with other states. And the difference now is we are working directly with a vendor. The challenge when you have, 3 to 5 states in a consortium all trying to produce a product that works for their state is you end up with who has the most sway, who has the funding, and that's kind of the system that gets built. And that was the challenge in our last consortium pre-pandemic. So the difference now is that we're working with a private vendor whose sole interest is Vermont's unemployment system.
Which is exciting.
Yeah.
Given our time, would you, are you almost done with your?
Yeah, again, I don't have a lot that, we can kind of weave in and out of what we have or what we want to discuss as Jay talks about workforce development. I think we'll also want to hear about the Office of Workforce
We're
Strategy and
wanting to
Development.
meet Sabina.
What I will hand out to you is, and I'll leave you this pack, but every 2 years, Matt's team working with the McClure Foundation
Oh,
highlights Vermont's most promising jobs. And
Yes,
this is a
we-
partnership
Yeah, we
that
got
comes out. So this is the new edition
Ivy Drive.
as of 2025. So
Yeah,
Can I ask
Yeah.
This doesn't have to be answered right now, but I have a ongoing policy inquiry in my mind about increased natural disasters
Mhm.
and
right.
the flexibility of the system.
Yeah.
Obviously, you all have really evolved from the flooding activities, but we could face almost any natural disaster, air quality issues from fires, et cetera.
Yes.
It to me is also a VOSHA question, given that outside of session, we saw some other communities that had flood activity where people died because they weren't allowed to leave work on time. So it's in my mind every time I hear one of those news stories.
Yeah.
How are we protecting employees as this becomes more real?
So I think the one piece on the first half of that is, again, for the new members. So the way unemployment insurance is funded from the benefit side is that an employer pays a percentage rate on the first amount of wages that are earned. And so we have legislation that sets what the tax rate is based on the health of the trust fund and what is the amount of wages that an employer pays taxes on. And so the base rate is the taxable wage base. And so I think it's roughly around $15,500. So they pay taxes on the first $15,000 that an employee earns. That percentage, what is collected based on that, goes directly into the trust fund. So all of the employer contributions go into the trust fund. None of the employer contributions go to administer the program. The trust fund can only be used to pay benefits, so it can't be used to fund department activities or to fund our administration of the program. It sits at the U.S. Treasury. We pull down those funds each week to pay benefits.
Do you know how much is in it right now?
300 and something $million. We were at 520
Pretty good shape.
Yeah, we are at a healthy level. For most part, we were one of the only states that didn't need to borrow during the
Right.
pandemic.
Which ones?
And I think the debate that we were having pre-pandemic was how much is, when you're getting up to $500 million in your trust fund, that's very little when you're talking about New York, but for Vermont, that covers quite a bit. And so we were talking about what is the healthiest level
Right,
of the trust fund, and how does that, what is the burden that puts on employers to contribute to the trust fund, and we can have a deep dive on how the system works. But so for instance, on the disaster unemployment situation, right? So there is a federal program called DUA, Disaster Unemployment Assistance. And what that does is allow us to tap into federal monies to administer a disaster program and also pay disaster benefits out of that program. Because the way that system, I'll take, for example, the 2023 flood in July. Most of those people who were impacted by the flooding, whose employment was impacted, were covered under regular unemployment. And so really the disaster unemployment is for people who do not qualify for regular unemployment. We saw that during the pandemic with pandemic unemployment assistance. And so again, in most cases, there are requirements and eligibility functions in the system that would allow somebody to qualify for traditional unemployment during a natural disaster. And then those that for some reason fall out of that category can tap into federal, but it does require those federal emergency declarations and disaster declarations for that to happen. I will also say that our new, currently when we operate disaster unemployment assistance, it's done outside of the mainframe because it's not a function of the mainframe system. The new system will have disaster unemployment assistance built into it. So it will have more functionality.
So I'm just,
Yep.
our time is precious. And I know we were going to shift to workforce. I'd love to have Kendall set up our workforce because Kendall and I have been working so closely on this for 2 years.
Yes.
And it's lovely to have you as Deputy Commissioner. Welcome.
Thank
Really.
you, Senator. Yes. Commissioner, you can stay.
I'm
I don't know. if
Just
you
moving
like-
over for Jay.
Yeah,
All of us.
like shift.
You're
all
gonna
of
have to
us.
come up with Jay.
So,
All of us need opportunities.
and
to-
Sabina's gonna have to come up here.
Yeah.
Well, I'll step back here just a second.
So all of us need opportunities to grow in our work. And it's just
Yeah.
wonderful that we've chosen to grow into a workforce labor
Thank you.
area that we have worked so closely on.
I'm
So
very excited to
Well
welcome
done
to
to
the
this
team
work.
here. Thank you. So, what the senator is referencing is in my former role in the governor's office, I was a member of our Special Oversight Workforce Expansion and Development Task Force or team or committee. Thank you, committee, which we affectionately called SOCWED because we all love a good acronym. And that work went on for about, I think, 2 years, maybe like 2.5 years. And then we did out of a bill that actually passed through this committee in 2023, I believe. It was S11, if you're wanting to look it up on the website. I think Act 183 might be the act number. Thank you, Jay.
is it Act
2022. Act 183 of 2022. And so what that work entailed was whether and how to set up an enhanced or elevated workforce office that could really be the convener both across the state government and all the programs that we administer, whether they're in FEDAL, ACCD, Ag has programs, even transportation has programs, as well as what's happening in the nonprofit and private space to really align efforts, not duplicate efforts, be strategic and thoughtful in terms of identifying our priorities as a whole and how things are being sequenced so we get the most return on investment and are ultimately best serving Vermonters and businesses. So that has come to pass last year, again, through this committee. There was a bill that created the Office of Workforce Strategy and Development. We're trying to figure out what that acronym is. It could be OWSAD, which is kind of weird. So
because it's so happy that we don't want to be sad.
have to find, or just OWSD, which Sabina will introduce herself in a moment. And so under Sabina's work to managing, as the commissioner said, the State Workforce Development Board, as an administration, we're really looking on how to elevate this conversation, lean into it, and really try to help pull together all of the system partners and really develop what that system looks like in a cohesive, coordinated way. So the Department of Labor, bringing it back to what we do as a department, is one slice of that pie. And so Jay here can talk about, as I tee this up, what he does in the workforce space with his team. We are looking forward to working with your committee this year on the second half of a bill to basically assist the office with really defining what are Sabina's roles and duties. I believe you mentioned that, you said right before we came in. So we're happy to come back and testify on that when the time is right. We were able to reach committee consensus. Commissioner and Jay are also part of those conversations.
That bill is drafted and we'll be ready for us to discuss it.
Perfect. Otherwise, as a department, and Jay will go through his work here in a second, and Sabina will come up. We probably won't be coming to you with a super robust department level agenda or amount of ask this year. We're really focused on the UI modernization project that the commissioner was just outlining. We may have a few UI technical corrections that hopefully should be pretty dry, boring, and uncontroversial for you to look at if you're looking for something to start off your committee work with and get that out of the way. Otherwise, we will be supporting other efforts that the legislature and the administration takes up, like housing and how housing is workforce policy. One of the things we hear all the time, every day, right, is that employers are having trouble attracting and retaining talent because they can't find housing. Education transformation, what role does education play? Again, in terms of workforce development and attracting people to live and want to work here. As well as if there's other tax code changes, like if there was a move to repeal the tax on military pensions. These are people that often are ready for a second career, and we have trouble retaining in Vermont because we're not competitive in that manner. So we'll be doing kind of a supportive role to a lot of other work of your committee, but we're not going to necessarily be in front of you saying, here's really specific Department of Labor workforce.
May I just put a pin in the technical corrections on UI? And then the other technical correction. If you'd be kind enough to get what you would like to Sophie ASAP, that would be great.
Yes. We can connect with that. All right. So maybe I will switch out with Sabina. And if you want to come up with Jay for you guys to talk more about specific workforce policy.
And Jay, thank you, Ken. Thank you. Jay, we welcome you. It's wonderful to have you.
Nice to be here.
And wonderful that's about in a second. And we give you the floor because, as you know, workforce is a key piece of what our interest. And certainly one of our top priorities has been for the last year. So
Thank you. Jay Ramsey, I am the Director of Workforce Development at the Department of Labor.
Yes, and I'm Sabina Haskell, the 9 days in Executive Director of the Office of Workforce Strategy and Development.
Welcome, Sabina.
Thank
Good to have you wearing a different hat in this committee.
Thank you.
So I'll just give you a little bit of my background so you know who I am for the new members, the existing members. Maybe you remember who I am. I have worked for the state of Vermont for 13 or 14 years. I started my career with the state at the Agency of Education, where I worked in career and technical education. I was the state director of career and technical education. I worked for the agency for 10 years. And the last 2 years, I was an assistant director overseeing the CTE program and the adult education and literacy program. So those directors were reporting to me. I moved to the Department of Labor 3 years ago. Feels like maybe 1 or 10, I don't know. But I was hired as the Registered Apprenticeship Program Director there. And after 8 months in that role, I moved into be the Director of Workforce Development. So in the structure that you heard from Commissioner Harrington, I'm a division director, so I'm directing the activities of roughly 80 employees. In the time that I have been the director, I have tried to be strategic in how we staff. So we have federal programs that have a lot of requirements on them and expectation of compliance from the federal government. So I've shifted 6 positions from the field, as we call it, from the regional offices to work in central office, helping us build out our programs and build systems that will allow the federal money to keep coming in. We talk about WIOA, the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, a lot. I will talk about that, but I do want to talk about some of the other programs that come in that you might be less aware of. Programs that we have are benefiting kind of specific populations that are the most vulnerable. So that's what WIOA really is intended to do. We also have a federal program through the IRS. We received $79,131 this year to administer the work opportunity tax credit. That money does not go to businesses for tax credits. That pays for our staff capacity to process applications and verify the application. What we're checking for is that a business hires someone, they submit the tax credit application. The new employee has to be in one of 11 categories, and basically it's where they justice involved. Are they on long-term SNAP and TANF? Are they a long-term unemployed person? Were they involved in corrections? There's 11 categories. So that's an incentive for a business to hire a population. That's the population sort of that we're working with here.
And then they get a tax credit from the
And they
IRS.
get a tax credit from the IRS. We're standing up a new profit stream portal for that. So when we're talking about IT projects, this is an IT project that's probably not on your radar.
Can I ask how many businesses are taking advantage of this tax credit?
I can get that information for you. I don't have it on the tip of my tongue here, but
And what is it? I mean, what value does that have for an employer? I think that's,
Sure.
I think
can
it's one
provide
of
that.
those things we'd love to know.
Okay. And so happy to provide that after. Another program that you might not be aware of that we administer that serves veterans is the Jobs for Veterans State Grant. This fiscal year, we received $500,000 from the federal government. And that number is based on a formula. It's based on the number of veterans seeking employment as a portion of veterans seeking employment in all of the states. So we have that pays for 4.5 FTEs. Those staff are out pounding the pavement, trying to serve veterans where they are. There's veterans organizations throughout the state. We have partnerships with them, but we're trying to make sure veterans are aware of the services that are available through the Department of Labor and other partner programs.
What's your success number there?
I'm happy to provide that afterwards. I think the trouble that we have in reaching veterans is that they're not all coming to us and we're having to go meet individually with them, and it's sort of word of mouth. And then there's another component to the program, which is disabled veterans outreach. And many veterans don't want to identify that they are disabled. So that's a little bit more of a tough time. We do have a relationship with Higher Ability, but Higher Ability also doesn't see a lot of veterans or people identifying themselves as veterans.
So there's no one portal that houses all veterans that are living in Vermont, except maybe the tax department.
Maybe. I'm not aware of.
Yeah, that's part of the challenge here is that there is no way to identify all the veterans. They self-identify.
Are all of the employees in the program veterans?
Yes, it's a requirement of the program. And the staff in the program are required to go through the National Veterans Training Institute so that they can understand how the program works and how to case manage the veterans, how to provide services effectively to them.
Can you forward us that? I don't remember the last time I heard about this program. Like to share with some folks.
Yeah, we're gonna clearly have a follow-up on this is just the beginning.
Jay, will this one be in our workforce report that is delivered soon?
Yes. Maybe not the details that
Yeah.
you're all looking for, but I will forward some materials to you all.
The report, just so folks know, is every year we submit a workforce development report. That should be to you either by the end of this week or early next week.
Right.
It might be worth having one of those employees in to speak, because I don't think we often hear enough about unique veteran employment issues.
Sure. We have that switch that I mentioned, moving staff from regional offices to the central office, meant creating program administrators. So I have a veterans program administrator who could
Right.
speak to you. Okay. So I'm talking about programs that serve individuals where we're conducting outreach to individuals. That's one side of what we do. Serving businesses is another side of what we do. So the public job seekers and what we're calling career advancers is why we exist, trying to develop their skills and make them employable. And we also serve businesses. So Senator Clarkson, you would ask the question, do we? How do we? So some of our case managers split time between managing the cases of individuals and conducting outreach to employers to make them aware of our services, to connect them to other state resources, and also to help them navigate the job board, which we offer at no cost to employers. That's the one job link.
Job board being job listings,
Yes.
our own version of Indeed,
Yes.
which preceded Indeed.
Yes. And just so our staff are helping employers post their jobs. We're working on some compliance with Act 155 that was passed last year around wage transparency, where
Yes.
the system will be updated to require the employers to state the wage range for the position. And we'll be conducting outreach to employers to make them aware of that change, even though that falls under the Attorney General. We're still serving employers as a state. So that's sort of business services. We also support businesses when they're laying off workers. We do rapid response events for those employers to help the employees who would be laid off understand what we do, understand the available opportunities through WIO and other programs, and to help them understand what's going on in the labor market. Thankfully, as companies announce their layoffs now, we have other companies reaching out to us to say, how can we get access to this pool of people? So it has worked out positively for the people who are being laid off.
And you partner with businesses who have apprenticeship programs and interns.
Yes, and other, I'm saying job seekers and employers, and then we have a bridge, that's training programs, and supportive services, and there are all sorts of things that go under supporting that bridge. Apprenticeship is our sort of premier training program that we register a business's own training program as registered apprenticeship. You all probably understand apprenticeship as a training program for electricians and plumbers. It is also a training program for phlebotomists and people in IT, and yes to all of the other trades and manufacturing. All of the sectors that are important in Vermont's economy can have registered apprenticeship programs. Federal grants that we receive. This year we got almost 400,000 from the federal government that we are investing in trades apprenticeship programs as a means of helping to develop the workforce around building houses. And last year, we got about 300,000. That money went into building out a teacher apprenticeship program that we're piloting in the Northeast Kingdom in partnership with the Agency of Education. We transfer money to them to pay for a position to work with the schools in the Northeast Kingdom and with Vermont Rural Education Collaborative. So we're trying to leverage the federal investments in ways that will expand the program to support areas of the economy where we haven't had programs before.
Great. Would you touch, briefly, because we only have about 7 or 8 minutes left.
Okay.
I'd love to, if you could tee up Sabina and workforce, where are we? We have slimmed down as a result of our work in this committee and with the House. We've slimmed down the State Workforce Development Board, which is exciting, and we have created the Office of Workforce Strategy and Development. And we have it's very exciting. We have a new chair of the State Workforce Development Board, and we have a new executive director finally, and it's very exciting from the Office of Workforce Strategy and Development. And it's great to welcome you, Sabina.
Thank you very much. Yeah,
In this, I mean, what I feel like I haven't heard so far, maybe I missed it, is I've been hearing Retain is one of your most successful programs to date, and somehow that is.
I mean, we're in touch about it. Has been, I'm in we're on top of Retain. I've asked Jay and Dirk Anderson to address it. It's sort of fallen through some of the cracks of the feds. So we're on Retain. It's a wonderful program, and we're hoping to make sure that it is retained.
Someone reached out to me,
Yeah.
who's a beneficiary of the program, and I forwarded.
Oh,
Just
great.
for general knowledge, the Retain program is a federally funded grant that we received about 4 years ago. And it is under our workers' compensation division because it deals with injured workers and getting them back to work. And the federal money came from the federal office that oversees workers' compensation. So it's under that program.
And that I'm not sure that grant has been renewed.
The funding was one-time funding that
Right.
does expire, and there is no new federal funding coming out.
Right. So I think we're chatting. I'm hoping that the woman who runs it, Karen, who was here yesterday, at DHMC, anyway, we're working on it, and occasionally we'll have more on that hopefully soon. Because it's a great program. Anyway, Sabina.
okay, thank you. New to the office, 9 days, as I said earlier. I've been working with the state for the last 3. I've been in many different positions around the state, both in public service and in private sector. I was at FESAC for 7.5 years, and so I recognized and worked for the newspapers in Southern Vermont, all that. And so I have a pretty strong sense of the state and what's going on with all the different places I've worked and lived. But just briefly, we're looking at structuring a timeline on what our activities are going to be this year. One, right off the bat, we are planning on naming the new board in the next several weeks. You mentioned
You have your 2 legislators already.
That's right. And our core members, and yes, but there'll be an announcement about that in the next couple of weeks, and starting to plan out when the board meetings will be for the rest of the year, and then selecting the executive committee, which will be meeting regularly to start to move forward with the strategic goals and the vision for the board and what needs to be implemented, each step of the way. And we're meeting with the new chair next week. You just mentioned him, Jay Bellows. He's president of Core Power in Waterbury. And so we'll be having a nice conversation with him about that. And then we'll be working with them. We have to hire an assistant for the office. So that's underway as well. I've got job specs in with HR, et cetera.
And we can put an asterisk on this for those of us who care about new costs. These are not new costs, these are repositioned positions, which realigned positions, which is
Right, right.
all of this, all of Sockway. Yes, proposals are realigned positions.
We'll be putting together a task force to look at the framework and what should be, starting to build out the timeline and strategic vision for this. When we met last week, I said, I think of the office as being the 4 Cs, the convener, the connector, the collaborator, and the clearinghouse for everything workforce.
And the coordinator, chief, and most important of the Cs is coordinator.
Okay, coordinate, there you go. Yeah, and making sure that, that there is that we're weaving a web so everybody knows what everybody's doing and starting to build some relationships that work for every part of the state.
Right, exactly. So as in that capacity, for an example, I got an email last week
Yes.
from a group that want to create a new apprenticeship and a new workforce development model. And again, another piece over here, great idea, coordinated centric, go straight to Sabina to say, let's begin this conversation.
Yeah.
But let's begin it in coordination with all the other work that we're doing in this area. Is this duplication? Is it duplicative of work at Champlain College and at other NCTE? How can we coordinate this
How
desire?
maybe
to
they
have-
should be working with this group, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And so that is, I think, as much as possible, if we can funnel creative new workforce development stuff through Sabina, that would be great, because we're hoping that you will be the funnel for workforce development asks and priorities.
So you're the workforce czar that we've
She is.
long awaited.
Yeah,
Hooray.
Sabina. Maybe we'll have to have a little PR.
Oh, heck.
Anyway, it's great to have you, and we will
Thank you.
we will hope for some updates as you move along on this trajectory of establishing yourself in the office.
Absolutely.
Great.
You can count on that. Yes. Yeah.
Terrific.
Yeah.
We are gonna see a lot more of you. Any questions before, yeah, David?
Yeah, new guy questions, I'm sure. I'm curious. So obviously you track unemployment statistics and such. What about unfilled labor demands? Do we track that, and whose office does that fall into?
You mean across sectors, across employers,
Across the
all of the
state,
above?
yeah, everything.
Yeah, so
And
we do track some of that from a statistical model. Matt can share more of that. So part of the information that comes out of his office is where are the job vacancies and in what sectors or industries. The other tool for us, I think, is Vermont Job Link, which we can also use that system of what employers are posting jobs up there. I think there's like over 7,000 jobs. 7,000. But for Vermont alone,
Oh, okay.
I think it's like 7,500 in Vermont alone. It does capture jobs that are in the surrounding areas that may not be Vermont based or are virtual based. So that number is higher. And so we can pull that data and look through that in terms of sector and industry.
is that part of your, did you say monthly report or quarterly report or annual?
To the legislature, we only do an annual report, but there is a jobs
Jobs
report.
report.
And I would have to pull the data table on that just to see if that number's in there. I can see that. We can make sure you also get a copy of the most recent jobs report.
And Rowan or whoever, and can we make sure that's emailed to our committee?
Yep.
Just as to both House Congress.
Absolutely, I'll follow up with that.
Thank you. Well, thank you all. This is a great start.
ask just a,
Oh, sorry, Brandon, sorry, I didn't see.
and I realize the
Yeah.
top issue. We talked previously on a number of occasions about the extent of fraud, particularly fraud that came out of COVID. And I never was able to get a number as to how much and where. And again, I haven't forgotten it. I'll keep asking the question. Hopefully I get an answer at some
Yes.
point. I want to get an understanding of what happened, what losses occurred, and what funds were affected by those losses? And then second, what, if anything, was done to follow up on those to see if there could be any potential recovery? So that is one. The second, if you will recall, we've talked previously about fraud. There was a long period of time in which there was no prosecution whatsoever because it wasn't a crime for a claimant to commit an overt act of fraud. And we did do something to fix that a little bit, not completely, last year. I'd like to understand what happened as a result of that change. Have we recovered anything? Have we discovered or documented any cases of fraud as a result? And are there any statistics to back that up?
So perhaps you can come back to us with that. That would be helpful, because that, as we know, is an ongoing.
And that's the short list.
Rental practice.
Do we happen to know that Cameron left me his big file of fraud notes for Senator Brock on my desk?
Great. Well, thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. This is just a terrific start, and we'll be seeing more of you soon. Yes. Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. So we're on break until 10:45, and for those